Guys, today we're going to talk about the Neolithic Revolution and the rise of civilization. So the big important things that we're going to be talking about today are going to be the agricultural revolution, which basically kicks off the Neolithic Revolution, the domestication of animals, and then eventually we're going to see rise of civilization. So we're going to start to see people move together into villages and start to create civilization. Okay? All right, here we go. So anything on here that's orange is going to be highlighted today. So make sure you highlight those things. So human survival depends on this systematic growing and storing of food. Okay, we need to eat, right? And so this is something that happened with the Neolithic age. Okay, so the Neolithic Revolution began at the end of the last ice age around 8,000 BC, so about 10,000 years ago. Okay, so Neolithic is Greek for new stone. So this is the new Stone Age. This is not the Paleolithic anymore. This is not the old Stone Age. So what we're doing is we're seeing a systematic change in human development. So people are going from hunting and gathering to systematic agriculture. So what they're doing is they're planting crops and they're even domesticating or taming animals for food, for clothing, for work. Okay, so we use a lot of different animals like cows, for example. We use them like you see, like the ox here are being used for work, but you got the sheep over here that are being used for their wool and for their meat. Okay, so they're deliberately planting and they're deliberately using animals for food. Okay, because really in the Paleolithic age, your whole life revolved around just finding food. Well, now with this, we are creating it ourselves. Okay, so some historians believe that this new agricultural revolution was the single most important event in human history. Okay, because it is what is going to bring us to a rise of civilization. It's what's going to bring people together into villages and get them working together. It's what's going to start economies and trade and everything like that. Okay, so this might be the single most important event in human history. Okay, so speaking of domestication of animals, domestication of the dog has gone very well for humans. I just saw these memes and I thought they were funny to include in this. So the one on the left, when you can hear the call of the wild and it's pulling at you, but you still have the breakfast dishes to wash. And this one here is like one of my favorite memes. Humans at the campfire, it's cold and I'm starving. Maybe I should ask for some scraps. What's the worst that could happen? 10,000 years later. And if this isn't most people's dogs right now, I don't know what is. Okay. So the ability to acquire food regularly gave humans greater control over their environment. So they didn't have to follow the herds anymore. They didn't have to be nomadic because now we can plant and we can stay in one place. Okay, so because of that, people start to settle into communities, and this is going to be the big important thing about development of civilization that leads to that. So systematic agriculture developed all over the world between 8,000 and 5,000 BC. So, for example, the Mesoamericans, so that's on the side of the ocean, they inhabited the inhabitants of present-day Mexico and Central America. They grew beans, squash, and maize, corn. Okay, they're going to give rise. This is all going to give rise to permanent settlements, and so at first they're going to be basically farming villages, so Neolithic farming villages. But the largest of these is called Catalhuyuk, and that's in present-day Turkey. We're going to talk about Catalhuyuk here. So this is a pretty interesting look at Catalhuyuk. So what they would do is they would just build on each other's dwellings, basically. So they would use like mud brick, and they would like so one person might start something, and then the next person would just kind of add on to it. That way, you don't have to make four whole walls and a roof. Oftentimes you could see the guys coming out the top. Okay, so oftentimes that's how it was. You would just go up instead of out in most cases. And then in the center there was often there was in Kitahuyuk, in the center there was a temple. Okay, so they were definitely religious, okay, and probably pagan from what we understand, okay. All right. Um, so, because of the increased food production and storage, people had more food than they needed. So, they allowed some people, or this allowed some people to do work other than farming, which is pretty cool. So, this is when we start to see artisans become a thing. Okay. So, artisans are somebody who makes something. Okay. So, makes like jewelry or weapons or anything. And so, these items are really going to foster trade. Okay, so maybe one village is really good at jewelry, but the next village is really good at pottery. So they could trade their jewelry and their pottery with each other, and then they both have jewelry and pottery. At Katahyuk, they also had shrines to and statues of gods and goddesses. So religion more and more was gaining importance. So, like I said, right in the middle there was a temple, and it was usually up high. Or in at Katahyuk, it was up high, and the reason for that is because it was closer to the gods. Okay, and we're going to see this with when we talk about the Sumerians and the ziggurats. The temples are up high. Okay, and we'll talk about those later. But the Neolithic revolution brought many important changes, so that we're going to see more complex communities develop. Trade is going to cause people to specialize, and the division of labor is going to start to develop. So people are going to have specific jobs within their communities, is what that means. This is when we see basic crops will first be cultivated, and they're going to start to weave cloth for clothing. Okay. All right. Okay, so the roles of men and women are going to develop. So this is where we really start to see gender roles really take place. So the women started to do more of the domestic tasks like weaving, and obviously they were responsible for taking care of the children as well. Men became much more active. Okay, so they were the farmers, they were the herders, they were the ones who went out of the home to contribute to the community. And as men took on more responsibility outside the home for getting food, protecting the settlements, etc., they started to play a more dominant role. So the men were the ones who became the leaders of the early civilizations. Okay, so from 4000 to 3000 BC, people are going to start to learn to use metals, and so first thing they're going to start to use is copper, and then people are going to mix that copper with tin, and that makes bronze. Okay, bronze is more durable, and so this kicks off what's known as the Bronze Age. Okay, and so this is the first major metal age that we see is the Bronze Age. So this is kind of how the Bronze Age moved. Okay, so you could see the center of it is in Eastern Europe and then Turkey here. And then it's going to move. So we're going to see the movement of um, tin and that. They're going to start to create more bronze. And then uh, the technology is going to spread throughout Europe and Eastern Asia or Western Asia there. Okay. Lots to highlight on this one. So the emergent civilization. So what's going to happen is culture is going to start to develop. So as people get into their little communities, for every community there's a certain culture. You could argue that there's a different culture here in Collinsville than there is over in Edwardsville. Um, so it's going to basically a culture is a people's way of life. So it's how they go about doing things. Now, a civilization is a complex culture. So there's 6 different characteristics of civilization. You're going to need to know all 6 of these, okay? So these are cities, government, religion, social structures, writing, and art. And so the first civilizations and cities developed in river valleys, okay? The very first one is going to develop in what is present day Iraq, okay? So that's Mesopotamia. We're going to talk about that more in the next unit. But those will develop in river valleys, and the reason for that is because water's close. Okay, so it's easy to get that. It's easy to use the water to cultivate crops. And then the first governments were led by monarchs. So these are kings or queens. So this means power is not passed down to whoever is the most qualified. It's passed down from generation to generation within a family. And then these monarchs, they're going to organize armies in order to protect their subjects, and they're going to make laws in order to regulate their lives. Okay? All right, so this right here is going to be a video about life in the Bronze Age.
Would you like to live in the Bronze Age? Probably not. It's hard to imagine nowadays that it's possible to survive without Wi-Fi or indoor plumbing. But despite not having these things, Bronze Age people actually did surprisingly well. It's not like they were cavemen. They built homes, they wove cloth, and they farmed their own food. However, though, despite the success of the agricultural lifestyle, this was a hard life to maintain.
There's lots of evidence of people surviving very comfortably in their landscape. Evidence for them successfully rearing animals, killing animals, butchering animals, and making flint tools with which to do all of those tasks. And I think what we sometimes forget is that people in the past had a great range of skills that today we lack. I think it's very easy to think about prehistoric people from the Bronze Age or the Neolithic as being primitive and as being very different to us, but they're actually very sophisticated.
We can understand how they lived from the things that they left behind. Food residue on broken pots shows us the types of food they liked to eat, like wheat and barley, which they turned into bread, and even nettles they picked and boiled into stews. Lots of animal bones from oxen, pigs, and sheep are frequently found on Bronze Age sites and were another important aspect of their daily life. Their meat was eaten, their hides worked into leather, and their bones were even fashioned into tools. Nothing was wasted.
There would have been specialists in Bronze Age society, particularly for things like making metalwork and for the high-end objects, perhaps some of the high-end ceramics. People would have specialised in those areas. But it's quite clear that everybody would have had the basic skills of flint knapping or flint use and would have been able to really survive in quite tough conditions in a way that we couldn't today.
But who else leaves behind bones? Well, you do. Human remains provide an important glimpse into Bronze Age life. By looking at the way people were buried, we can guess about what was important in death, but also in life. People were buried in man-made mounds called round burrows. Now, often in these graves, they contained gold objects, jewelry, bronze, tools, and even pottery. And this can give us a little insight into what Bronze Age people found important.
Okay, so that's basically kind of the last part is how we know what was going on in the Bronze Age and what they did find important because based on what was in many of the graves. So I thought that video was pretty good. Okay, so religion. So religion is going to explain the workings of nature and the existence of things. Okay, so whenever they didn't understand what what was going on, they looked to religion. Okay, so what we're going to see is a rise of priests that's going to develop to perform rituals for pleasing the deity. So doing things to please the gods. Now, many rulers throughout this time period are going to claim that their power actually comes from the divine. This is usually called divine right, which is a term we're going to be using a lot throughout this class. So, divine right means that God gives the ruler the power, and so that therefore the ruler only needs to answer to God or to the gods or whoever. Okay, so some of them even believe they were divine themselves, which is something when we get into ancient Egypt, we'll talk a lot about that. So social structures developed based on economic status. Basically, the more money you made, the higher socially you were. So the rulers, the priests, the officials, and the warriors were the upper classes. Below them was a class of the free farmers, the traders, the artisans, the craftspeople. And then on the very bottom, you're going to see your slaves and your servants. Okay, so this right here is an example of a hierarchical class structure. Writing. So writing was used to keep records and for creative expression through literature. We'll talk more about writing in the next unit specifically, but then the arts, the painting, sculpture, etc., those were developed to portray natural forces or gods and goddesses on temples, shrines, pretty much anything that was like a part of their daily lives, or maybe they were trying to please the gods in some way. So those were our different. Like I said, those are the six aspects of civilization. Okay. All right. So don't forget to do your processor. It's on the bottom of the page. I hope you guys all have a wonderful day.